asking me, literally, what's the truth versus what the narrative says?
It's an inside job, for sure. Don't be foolish that all of a sudden they broke in 15 different places in the fence and nobody showed up for 8 hours.
I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on J Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Guys, I have a very special show with a special guest for you today. And as you saw that red warning with the big T for truth, if you are easily offended, if you like to live in the comfort of half truths or whatever the man on the stage tells you is true, and that just makes you feel good, or you're some kind of gatekeeper, you're not going to get anything out of this show. You're not going to like this show. It's not going to make you feel good. But if you're someone who wants to dig and get to the bottom of things, get to the bottom of issues that are very controversial, but they direct what's going on in the world, well, then stick around. Keep an open mind, and I guarantee you are going to learn something today with one of the best articulators of this issue of Jewish supremacy, including how is it a problem? How does it work with them controlling the left wing in many cases and also the right wing? And how does that all work when it seems like they're on opposing ends of the spectrum? Sam Parker is a former guy that was involved in professional baseball. He was involved in the biotech industry. He got into politics in 2018 in Utah and ran against Mitt Romney. And so he knows his way around, the normal town square, we'll put it like that. But he, as I said, he articulates this issue very well. He's very well known on X. You can find him at Based Sam Parker. And we're about to get started. I will say, if you notice a change of outfit and a change of demeanor, it's because this recording was made yesterday. And for some reason, it had me muted during my entire intro. So just want you to be aware of that. We're going to dig in right now with Sam Parker. You're going to learn a lot, I assure you. Here we go. Pleased to bring you on, Sam. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's good to be on here with you.
Glad to have you, Sam. And if you don't mind, give us a little bit of your background. So go back to maybe your 2018 run for Senate. And then I know I'm asking you to squeeze a lot into a short amount of time here, but give us a feel for who you are. Why did you get involved with politics? And then there's been probably a big shift for you as well, coming to today in 2025.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I ran for the U.S. Senate against Mitt Romney in 2018 in the state of Utah. I was disappointed with Mitt's 2012 showing in the presidential election. I didn't like the way he handled it. I didn't particularly care for his soft position in a lot of respects. And between 2012 and 2018, I saw a lot more of that softness. I saw a lot of disagreements. And I grew to disfavor him and not want him to be our senator from Utah. He was moving in from Massachusetts. I called him the Cape Cod carpetbagger at the time, because he just kind of swooped in, like expecting, like, oh, it's just mine. I'm gonna move in and I'm gonna take this, even though I haven't lived here for 40 years or 30 years or whatever it was. Yeah. And so there were a few people I wanted to see get in the race against him, and they didn't. And so one day I said, okay, if nobody's going to challenge this guy, then I will. So I jumped in, and it was off to the races, and it was a really great experience. And I obviously I didn't win, but I did affect the race. I did affect outcomes, and I'm pretty proud of that. He did not win the state nominating convention. He came in second. I do believe I had a role to play there. I think I helped defeat him. So he didn't have this mandate coming out of the convention. And why did I get into politics? It's been gradual. I've always had a political inclination. I've always been interested in politics. I was a big fan of Ronald Reagan growing up, because I grew up in the 1980s. And, if you were a red-blooded conservative American in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was your hero. I mean, he was the man, right? He took on the Soviets. He took them down. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down
Well,
this wall. He
most
gave
conservatives would
that,
still say that today. If you're a red-blooded
right,
conservative, you have to
absolutely.
love Reagan.
Yeah, he gave that awesome speech in 1983 on the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars speech where he's talking about lasers and nuclear bombs in outer space and just like all this cool stuff. And as a kid, that really all that kind of captured my imagination,
Yeah.
right? And so I think from there it just was kind of in my blood. And of course, I got some from my parents too. They listened to Rush Limbaugh all throughout the 90s and early 2000s. So therefore, I listened to Rush Limbaugh as well.
Yeah.
So, that's how it kind of got into my blood and how I started getting involved. And then I started getting involved in the Utah political process because we have something there called the caucus system, which doesn't exist in any other state. Basically, what it is the state of Utah is divided up into 2,000 different neighborhood caucuses, if you will. Neighborhood. So, like, if you can divide your state up into like 2,000 neighborhoods and call each one of those a caucus, and then you go meet in your neighborhood caucus and you talk about the issues, you talk about the candidates, and then you elect representatives from your caucus to go vet political candidates. And it's your job then to go determine who's going to get on the primary ballot for the rest of the people to vote for. So it's a very important pre-primary filter mechanism to get good quality candidates. That's what the Utah caucus system is all about. And it doesn't cost a lot of money to do. It's accessible to anyone. This is how Mike Lee was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010 over a 3-term U.S. Senator Bob Bennett. It was through this caucus system. Some of you may have heard of Jason Chaffetz, who I think is a Fox News host now. He was in the House of Representatives for a while. I think he famously only spent like $5,000 on his first congressional campaign.
Yeah.
Going through the caucus system, meeting with people, having cottage meetings in people's homes and in public schools, conferences and stuff. And in Utah, you can do that. You can't do that in any other state. In every other state, it's these direct primaries. You have to have tons of money to buy up a lot of the media and get on people's radar. But you don't have to do that in Utah. So I got involved in that process in Utah at the caucus level. And then finally, I threw my hat and said, I'm going to run. So then I was on the other side of the caucus process.
One thing you're saying right now that I think would be disarming to a lot of the audience that may not like your positions now, if they, follow you on X, they may see stuff be like, anti-Semite or whatever. It sounds like your story is very, very typical of what mainstream conservatives who would stand against Mitt Romney and call him a rhino. I mean, it was just kind of a traditional political process for a guy that saw some of the problems and was going to stand against the old guard establishment of the Mitt Romney style right wing and go for it. And you did. And I think anybody can appreciate that. But now you sit here wearing a bad boy's hat. You're talking about American nationalism and what that means to you. And then if anybody follows you on X, they obviously see you're an articulator of identifying this issue that in terms of Zionism, Israel, Jewish subversion, and you articulate it very well. You're probably one of the best known talkers about it. So how did that happen? What was your eye-opening experience that led you down this road?
Well, going back to my campaign briefly, my campaign slogan, which is still on my profile bio, was MAGLA, M-A-G-L-A, Make American Government Local Again.
Okay.
That was my theme, Make American Government Local Again. It permeates everything I think about, everything I talk about. My entire philosophy is that people should be sovereigns and should rule themselves. And to be able to do that, you have to have government as local as possible. As local, in every case, as local as possible, whether that's a federal, state, or local, wherever the most local, the closest to the people this solution can possibly be, that's where it ought to sit, right? And so that's my philosophy. Now, talking about Jewish subversion and Zionist influence, that really defeats MAGLA. Defeats localized American government, because that is a worldwide tribe, if you will, a group of people who seek to control the world, who are aligned philosophically across national boundaries. It's the antithesis of local government, right? So how did I become awakened to it? It was gradual, as we were talking about earlier, and I canceled my cable in 2010. And that was momentous because I stopped feeding myself regularly the diet of Fox News and conservative media on TV. I was still reading it online. I would still get online and read National Review, The Weekly Standard, Breitbart, the Blaze thing.
Yeah, saying what you're
Conservative.
saying doesn't mean that you stopped listening to conservative media and started watching Rachel Maddow all the time.
No, never watched. I stopped watching CNN in the '90s.
Yeah.
Never watched MSNBC, and stopped watching Fox News in 2010. But I was still reading stuff online like Drudge Report and the National Review, the Weekly Standard, Blaze, conservative Mark Levin's Conservative Review. I used to listen to all the talk radio. I used to listen to Mark Levin, PragerU, or not PragerU, but Dennis Prager, and Michael Savage, and Ben Shapiro, and all these guys. And I was not awakened to Jewish power and Jewish supremacy. I was not aware of it. And I was very pro-Israel, as most conservatives were, and still are. And what really was the change was a couple things. Number one, I have a personal philosophy I aspire to be brave enough to follow the truth, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like I want to, for whatever reason, that's what I want. I want to be able to recognize the truth and then to have the courage to follow it. Because a lot of people know what the truth is about the various things, and they don't have the courage to follow it, no matter whether that's in business or faith or politics. For whatever reason, you know that this is the right course of action, but you don't follow it because you're too scared, or you're too timid, or you don't have the confidence, or you're weak, or you have addictions, or whatever it is, right? And so I just, for a lot of years, I'm like, I want to know the truth. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then number two, I want to have the courage to follow it and the strength to follow it.
Yeah.
And that enlivens me, right? That feeds me, that idea. So that was sort of like preparing the ground. What ended up happening was, I don't know, in the mid 20-teens, I got on Reddit one day. Like, I'd heard all about Reddit. At this point was like 10 years old, but I was kind of late to the Reddit party. But I can't remember why, but like I was like, maybe I'll go see what this Reddit's all about. I think it's because I was in a chat group with some friends, and a couple of them were on Reddit, and they'd talk about these things. They'd send links to things that were on Reddit. And so finally I'm like, maybe I should just get on Reddit and see what this is all about. And so I got on Reddit, and literally my first day on there, I make my very first post ever on Reddit, and it got censored. It wasn't even a political post. It was in the college football forum. I made some post about college football. I couldn't even tell you now what it was. I just remember it was about college football, and it got censored, and they deleted it. The admins for the subreddit deleted it. And I was like, this is outrageous. What's this censorship on? So I immediately went to Google, and I'm like, Reddit alternatives that with no censorship. And this one came up called Vote, VOAT.
Okay.
It's now defunct, but it was a free speech Reddit alternative. And for a while, it was a fantastic, glorious website. So I got on there, and that turned into my front page for the news every day. I'd get on to Vote, and it had a front page with all the trending topics and threads. And it was really interesting stuff. But it was free speech, like zero censorship, except for porn. No porn. Other than that, zero censorship whatsoever. And I remember, like, there would be these entries.
Which I want to say, we can come back to this, but it's kind of the opposite of X. X is proving that they do censor quite a bit of dissenting voices, yet they fully allow porn.
Yes, exactly. It's totally disingenuous. It's evil, really. But yeah, great point, great observation. You can get all the porn you want on X, but you can't get political opinions on X. So yeah, that's crazy. Meanwhile, the owners out there telling everybody it's a free speech platform. But yeah, so I get on Vote, and so it's totally free speech. So there's standard news articles and takes, but then interspersed amongst them were like, these every single time takes, and guess who it is again? The Jews, so every few posts would be something like that. And I'd be like, and at first I'm like, okay, anti-Semitism, but it's free speech. What can I do? I do believe in free speech. I always did. Even when I was pro-Semitic and pro-Israel and all that, I was still believed in, I didn't believe these people should be censored. So I just ignore it. I would just ignore it. It'd be in the feed. And I'm like, so for like a month or two, I would ignore those links and just read through the rest of the news. I don't know, at some point, a month or two, and curiosity gets the better of you, and you click on one. You're like, what's this all about? I keep seeing all this. Let's just see what this is about. And you read it, and you're like, eh. And then you do it again. And after you read 3 or 4 of those, you start scratching your chin, and you're like, yeah, what's going on here? After a few weeks, a few months. So after about 3 months on Vote, I remember calling a friend of mine and saying, hey, I'll call him Bob, my friend Bob. I said, Bob, have you ever noticed like this XYZ ABC with Jews and Israel? He's like, well, not really, but now that you bring it up, I guess I see what you're saying. And I'm like, yeah, there's just something going on here. I'm not exactly sure what, but there's something to this, I think,
Yeah.
And then that was 3 months in. 6 months in, like I'm like, okay, yeah, this is, there, I was like, and then 12 months in, I'm basically the person you see today. But so it was free speech. It was literally
did you find
free
that
speech.
once you begin digging, it's not like you don't really have to work hard to connect these dots. And
No.
the supremacy that you're talking about, whether you're talking about Larry Fink being the leader of BlackRock or Mark Zuckerberg being the CEO of Facebook, or the Wojcicki or whatever her name is, YouTube, and even going back in time in history, Karl Marx, like whatever his real name was. So
Magnus
it's like over
Hirschfeld.
and over and over again.
Yeah.
And you're like, if there's such a tiny people group as they claim to be, how is this freaking possible? And so,
exactly.
so then your story, that's where mine started, because people come at this from other angles. They may say, well, Zionism may not really just mean for the Jews to have a homeland where they can defend their, maybe, people come at it from that angle. They come at it from others. Mine was
there's almost infinite angles, right? There's people that, from Holocaust stuff to,
Schofield Bible stuff, realizing that's only like a 200-year-old deal.
Yeah, it's not even 200. It's like, early 1900s.
Well,
right?
no, I'm talking about the origins of premillennial dispensationalism.
Oh, right.
It's relatively new. Now, Schofield codified it with his notes.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. But so there's different angles of attack. There's different entry points, if you will, for people, coming into this thinking and into this universe that we're in. But that's how I got in. It just literally just free speech, just being exposed to free speech and no censorship, and being exposed to people highlighting these issues, memes, news articles, observations, and still, the learning process never really changes. I mean, I'm still learning every day. I know more about it and more about this issue, and I understand Jewish supremacy more now than I did a year ago.
Yeah.
Right. And I expect that a year from now, I'll be even that much further along. So it is a vast topic. It's an endless rabbit hole, but the basics are there. All right, there's a thing called Jewish supremacy. They believe themselves superior to us. They do infiltrate institutions. They do try to control narratives. They use isms to wage war on the goyim. Okay, they infiltrate our governments. They use what I call dark arts, which is blackmail, extortion, murder, bribery, collusion, these types of things. Obviously, they get a lot of power from money and wealth. They have a lot of wealth accumulation and money running the banking systems, the international finance system. So you start to, what happens is in this movement is you learn like things in a vacuum. You learn this thing about Jewish power, that thing about Jewish power, and so you're just kind of like going along, like throwing stuff in your bag. And at some point you start connecting dots. You start to see the tapestry, how it all connects, how it all fits together. And now you have a movie screen. Now you see the movie, but now your movie just keeps getting longer and longer and longer with more characters, and the plot gets more complicated. So that never stops. But essentially, it was just free speech took me there. About 6 to 12 months of free speech was sufficient to basically solidify my thinking on this topic. And by the way, that was just about 8 years ago ish, give or take. So I was well into my adulthood. And, so like at times I've checked myself. I'm like, okay, am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah, good.
I'm right because, and here's how I know I'm right. I know I'm right for a lot of reasons, but here's one. I spent like about 40 years of my life thinking one way, consuming information one way, with this one kind of context behind it. If this weren't right, how did it move me off of 40 years of deep entrenched learning and thinking? If this is false, right? If this is false, how did it move me off of that?
Yeah. Well, from a subjective point of view, I can see how that would mean a lot to you. To the average listener, they may say, well, maybe you just had a screw come loose or something, because they've not looked at it the way you have. But let's move away from you for a minute to 2024 in general. It was like a wave built of people noticing. That's the phrase. You know, they've noticed either the positions of Jewish power or maybe the Greater Israel Project, where wow, it seems like all these places that Israel just so happens to be, you know, attacking, Syria and Lebanon, and then, you know, of course, Gaza and West Bank, are all part of this Greater Israel Project, which the IDF wears a patch of on many of them on their shoulder sleeve. So, what? Give me your synopsis on what happened in 2024 with this. I wouldn't call it a great awakening, but I would say it went from my estimate here, 2% of the population knowing what we're talking about to probably 10 to 15% of people, not just but kind of getting it a little bit. What happened?
Well, it started with two things in 2023. First, we had something called Ban the ADL that trended on Twitter on August 31st and into the first part of September. Hashtag Ban the ADL. It was just this tidal wave that erupted on Twitter against the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Jewish organization that controls censorship on the internet.
Yes.
That's what it is. And that it went mega, super, ultra, lightning viral for several days. Involved people like Keith Woods, Lucas Gage, Jake Shields, myself, Chief Trumpster, Elijah Schaffer, a lot of big accounts. And it got so big that Elon Musk responded to it and started talking about maybe having to sue the ADL, because the ADL had launched an advertiser boycott against Twitter after Elon Musk bought Twitter. They immediately launched this Twitter boycott to try to basically kill it financially. All right. So they were basically trying to censor the entire platform.
And wasn't that because when Elon took it after Jack Dorsey had it, which he was, you know, hard leftist and censoring anything on the right wing, I think they were afraid of what X would become, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, the paint wasn't even dry on the sale, and they already launched Elon hadn't implemented anything yet, and they still launched the advertiser boycott against him to try to destroy him from day one. So that was killing a lot of reach. It was hurting people financially. It was basically all of X unified against the ADL. And to the point where even like within a week or two, Elon Musk was having a full-on Twitter space to address the issue. So that was in September of 2023, right? And that was an opportunity for people to bombard Twitter, which then started leaking into TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and other social media platforms, this whole situation with the ADL. And we talked about Leo Frank and the B'nai B'rith and, you know, basically Jewish power, Jewish supremacy. It started erupting there. And then just a month after that, on October 7th, you know, there was the Hamas attack on Israel, and then Israel's massive genocidal overreaction into Gaza that was launched the following week, and that has persisted until basically, I mean, today. It's still, since the ceasefire was announced, they've killed, I think, another 86 Gazans, wounded another 250. So Israel's just gone this genocidal maniac reaction, and that opened the floodgates, because now everybody around the world's talking about Israel and Zionism and Zionist power, and why can't we stop this? And every week it's a new red pill, like a Zionist infiltration of this government or that government or this institution or that institution. And we basically like fired everything. It's like fire everything. Yeah. And people just unloaded. Harrison Smith of InfoWars had the tweet that captured this early zeitgeist in early November 2023. After about a month of this, he said that he felt bad for the normies on Twitter who had been bombarded with 20 years worth of 4chan memes in the last 3 weeks or something, you know, and that's really what it was. I mean, everybody in our circle, noticers, if you will, we all had these memes that, you know, we couldn't share before, that we've been stocking up for years on Gab, on Vote, on 4chan, you know, on Telegram, other dark corners of the internet. And after October 7th, everybody just started they just released everything you had. And after about a month, everybody was out of memes, and we had to start creating new content, right? You know, but that's what really
plenty more to go down. I mean, let me ask you two quick questions on things you said. First one, just give me a short answer here based on my research about October 7th itself, the day and the planning for it. I think two things. This is my belief. There's no way Israel didn't know, and there's no way Israel didn't. When I say Israel, I'm talking about the elites in government, that they didn't want it to happen and allow it to happen to then have the vindication to go do what they're doing now. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. I think that's clear. They had two meetings in the middle of the night, the morning of the attack. They saw the activity. They had the high-level Shin Bet meetings, and with the generals in charge over there. They dismissed it. Obviously they moved the music festival there, and lengthened it so that it would be right there in the path of the attack. We know that they actually had the operational document leaked from Hamas a year previously. We know that somebody short sold the Israeli stock market, just like 9/11. I mean, on and on and on. I've given Twitter Spaces on 8-hour Twitter Spaces on this. So I mean, but yes, sure. It was. Okay. I am completely convinced that they allowed this to happen. They wanted it to happen, and they needed the pretext. And if you look at Israeli history, their 75-year history, they're constantly doing things like this, false flag attacks, or using certain things as pretexts to justify these massive overreactions and incursions.
Yeah, when I read about the King David Hotel, that was another big eye opener. Now, there's been, like you said, several iterations, whether you're talking USS Liberty, 9/11, but going back to King David Hotel, it was such a stark example. It was back when they came up with the Irgun, came up with their policy called defense by offense. We're going to go on the offensives, but we'll call that defense. It's crazy. And
the preemptive, Israel's famous for the preemptive attack. It's like they call that defense, and I'm like, it's not defense if you're attacking first, that's an offensive. But they're masters of language manipulation, and projection and inversion. I mean, it's kind of maddening to the normal person when they're first confronted with it, like that these people lie and project and invert like all the time. But you're exactly right with the King David Hotel. You had Menachem Begin, the leader of the Irgun, who hatched this plan to basically try to oust the British protectorate, the British government, from Palestine. And it was housed, the HQ was in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, and the Irgun stuffed these milk cans with explosives and blew up the hotel and killed like 90 people, several of them civilians, many British military personnel and many civilians. And later, Menachem Begin, this terrorist, became prime minister of Israel. They elected him.
Wasn't he the originator of the Likud party? Or he was the first Likud party member elected as prime minister. That's probably
I'm not sure. Maybe that might be that could be true. That could be true.
But the kicker on that story, as bad as that is, what you just said, which is enough, they also dressed as Arabs. When they did that, they dressed as Arabs to try to fool people. And then you go on to USS Liberty and you're like, and they tried to pretend it was Egypt to get us into a war that they wanted us to fight their enemies for them. I mean, I just see it over and over. And I got to say, Sam, it's made me sad. It's made me, because not only the fight that it's gotten me in with people of my own, political persuasion, but I didn't want to believe this at all. And I mean, I don't like it. I wish it wasn't true. But have you gone through that at all, where it's kind of like, man, I just wish this wasn't real. This conspiracy theory.
It's kind of a nightmare in a way to wake up. It's the 21st century. We're surrounded by all this technology and wonderful human advancement. But at the end of the day, we're under occupation from a bunch of pedophile terrorist murderers, and it goes back decades and centuries. Like we were born into a war that's been that they're waging against us. We didn't ask for this war. I didn't ask for this war.
Yeah.
But it's being waged against me. And I've now discovered this. And so, what are we going to do? What are you going to do? So, no, it's not ideal. It sucks. It's very surreal. It's very Twilight Zone that there's this small people around, this small, rootless, cosmopolitan, elite, if you will, a tribe, this international tribe that has amassed so much wealth and power for centuries now, to the point where they basically they're just everywhere and in everything with their hand on it. It seems like every lever of power. And it was all done before we came along. So it's like, it's not our fault. But
this was all going on back to before the Federal Reserve, but back when the news was extremely controlled, and your average American that's not Jewish wouldn't even seen this happening. They had no idea, a clue, the way that like a Woodrow Wilson had whispers in his ear to do this and do that and be paid off for this, to create the Federal Reserve and other things. it was all, so you're right. It was all going on. One thing you brought up a minute ago, you said the lies. And I thought, when you go back in history and you read a book like Martin Luther, and this would drive most, Protestant pastors nuts for me to bring this up. But, because like Eric Metaxas, for instance, loves Martin Luther, respects Martin Luther, but
I'll bet he never talks about his book. I'll bet he never talks about that book.
He doesn't, except when I read Metaxas' book Bonhoeffer, he does mention he's like, well, later in life he had gastrointestinal issues and it put him in a bad mood, so he began to like turn anti-Semitic. Right. That was his answer. Was like he had health issues, so he became anti-Semitic. Like, that's ridiculous. If you go back and read Martin Luther's book, which is called The Jews and Their Lies, he lays out exactly what we're talking about right now. And that was the other kicker for me. When I go back and have read these old anti-Semitic books by different people in history, that it's almost always the same. They didn't want to believe it. Then they saw enough evidence. They were like, it's kind of true. Then they saw it like tripled down on, and they were like, well, shit, I got to write about this or else they're going to take over.
You know what's interesting? That's a really good point, because I have found myself so many times in that position where, like, we say that, isn't it crazy how people separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles and different languages and time periods and eras and geography all say the same thing about these people? They all say that you go back 2,000 years, 2,500 years, 1,500 years, this part, Europe, Asia Minor, it's like they didn't have mass communication. They couldn't, they talked to the people in the next town over. That's as far as they were all saying the same thing. They had the same stories, the same myths, the same legends over and over again throughout history. And you're like, And then you notice things since October 7th. You see what they're saying online and how they're presenting things in the news, and you see their techniques and propaganda that they're using to try to justify October 7th and to censor us. And so you start making your own observations. And then you go read a book like Martin Luther's on the Jews and Their Lies, or other books, like The Conquest of the World by the Jews by Major Osmond Bay, or other, you read Codrianu, on the Jews, and you read, and it's like they're saying the exact same things that you've already learned on your own just off of Twitter and the news. And you're like, wow, these 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 500 years ago, these guys in other parts of the world speaking different language literally are saying the same things that I said in my tweet last week. Before I even read I was like, it's crazy. So, they want us to believe that this is just some irrational hatred that somehow propagates like a virus throughout history, from people to people, nation to nation. It's just some unique hatred that only exists against Jews and no other people. And there's no rhyme or reason for it.
Within the Christian church, within the Christian church that the ones I grew up in, they would say the reason that this happens is because they're God's chosen people. So it's a satanic temptation to just hate them. So we've got to always bless them. We got to love them because they're God's chosen. And it's the worst case of self-flagellation. Is that the right word for flogging yourself?
Yes.
That's not farting, right?
Flagellation, yeah. No, you're right. No. Now listen, I don't hate them. And as a Christian, yes, you should love, we're supposed to love and pray for our enemies, seek to redeem them. But that doesn't mean that we allow their degeneracy, that we allow their supremacy, that we allow their subversions. No, we must forcefully condemn and resist it, right? But the point is, yes, that's exactly right. Like, when are we going to believe our ancestors about these people rather than believing the lies these people tell about our ancestors? I mean, so if we believe Jews, they would say that all of our ancestors for the last 2,000, 3,000 years have been lying. All of them. They're all liars.
Hateful liars, yeah.
Hateful liars. Maybe we should start listening to our ancestors. Maybe there's something they can teach us. These people have been expelled over 1,000 times over the last 2,000 years, from 1,000 places. We say 109 times from 89 countries.
Yeah,
but really it's over 1,000 times. Over the last couple thousand years. Why does that keep happening? Maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's not some sort of weird irrational thing. So.
How do you reconcile the fact? Now, I may drop some facts here that you may not be aware of, but within Jewish tradition, I'm going to go back to the escape from Egypt. Okay, there was a large group that left with them. They call the Erev Rav, which would have been a mixture of Egyptians and other captured
non-Israelites. Yeah, they were non-Israelites.
Then
Yeah.
you've got the mixture of all the Khazars that came in and intermingled when they were dispersed. Then you've got like Donald Trump's daughter Ivanka. She
Well,
converts.
you had the Edomites in the second century
Yeah.
BC. I actually done threads on this. There have been many conversions into quote unquote Judaism over the centuries.
Yeah.
But that same thread of supremacy, that same belief system, and the same core demographic has existed all along the way. So if you think of a tree with branches getting grafted in, the tree of Judaism and Jewish supremacy has always been there. And yeah, there's been some graftings, but the roots and the trunk have been there consistently throughout the entire time. And, that's a whole other discussion. Where did the Jews come from? How did they get this way? There's a lot of different opinions. There's at least a dozen different opinions on the
Well,
Khazars.
I think you've answered my question, though, Sam, is that how are they maintaining this cohesion and supremacy where a group like the Rabbi Schneerson, he's a part of the Lubavitchers, right?
Mhm.
And he, from the Chabad, Lubavitch, like they'll put out these memes that say things like the Jewish people are millions of bodies with one collective soul. And it's one of those, you're kind of like,
Well, listen, they have a shared heritage. They have these celebrations and holidays, right? They have a shared heritage and belief system that has been written down for thousands of years. So, and they have a sense of common blood. So, a very tribal nature. So, through these different things, they've been able to maintain their core identity. Now, over the centuries, yeah, they do lose some people. They shed, if you will, but that maintains a strong, powerful core. And they, as Elon Musk said ironically about the ADL, they themselves create the anti-Semitism that blows back on them. And what that does is, and we say it's Jewish behavior creates anti-Semitism, right? Like anti-Semitism is the consequences of Jewish behavior, and they do it on purpose, I think, because what it does is it generates this external force that galvanizes their tribe.
yeah.
It gets them to hunker down and unify,
Yes.
right? It also allows them to maintain their victimhood narrative and status, right? And privileges. So it serves multiple functions to generate the anti-Semitism, right? And so what it does is it continuously renews their Jewish supremacy and their Jewish tribal identity and their sense of victimhood. As some people like filter off and are winnowed away over time, it's that anti-Semitism coming back galvanizes them and
I'll tell
keeps
you one
that
thing.
core together.
What you just said about the victimhood galvanizing them and it being a useful tool. I found a book on I went up to Maine and there was this huge like bargain antique bookstore, and I found a book by a rabbi who lived in some high rise in New York in 1909. So before World War I even. And it was called Stranger Than Fiction: A History of the Jewish People. Good size, 250-page book. I devoured that on my vacation. I read the whole thing. I was floored. This guy was so honest. He was like exactly what you said. Since the time of our expulsion or our escape, I shouldn't say expulsion, but escape from Egypt, he went back to Abraham and walked through he's talked about the Erev Rav. He talked about the Khazars as a very real thing and how, like, to the rabbis of Europe at the time, they were like unicorns. Like, who is this people that are now mixing with us? But he talked very much about how every time the people get persecuted, it galvanizes them together to keep their separateness. And I guess it's a very, there's a word for this, but when something doesn't seem like it would be logical, it is, where you wouldn't think that, I don't even know where I'm going with that. I'm just honestly, Sam, I'm amazed by the entire thing and that it's actually possible. And you said it well when you said it's like they're grafted into the main,
they're absorbed. They're assimilated into Jewish supremacy and Jewish identity. But the core identity and the roots have been there the whole time, maintaining, the Talmud was written. These people, Khazars didn't, crucify Jesus Christ. They weren't expelled from Egypt. They didn't sacrifice children to Moloch. They weren't, didn't have their Christian slaves taken away by the Romans, and they weren't expelled, by the Visigoths and other empires, so this Jewish people has been around for a long time, long previous to the Khazars which is the 700s and 800s, basically.
Right.
And so the Talmud was written and compiled by 600 AD. It was before the Khazars allegedly converted. And by the way, there's like at least a dozen different theories concerning the Khazars. So there's not even broad agreement on it. But to people who believe in that or whatever, the Jewish supremacy has been around since way before then. All right. And they were subsumed by it. They were assimilated into it, and they're carrying it on. There have been Christian conversions, other conversions into Judaism besides the Khazarian conversion. I believe that they like to keep the focus on the Khazarian conversion, if indeed it happened, because they appear more white. And so they're able to sort of like blame white people for the sins of Jewish supremacy. Whereas, so they don't talk about like Yemeni Jews or Iraqi Jews or Moroccan Jews or Mizrahi Jews or Sephardic Jews. They don't talk about all those, but you can find a lot of subversive Jews from these other sects as well, and some of them are even more hardcore Zionist than the Ashkenazi or Khazarian, the ones that are allegedly Khazarians. So I think they like to keep the focus on them because it takes heat off of Jewish supremacy, and they can blame white people.
Do you think that a lot of the very, guys that you'd see, if I didn't know who Benjamin Netanyahu was, and I saw him walking down the streets of Franklin, Tennessee, I'd think there's an old white guy. That would be my first thought, right? There's two competing narratives within the noticers. And I think neither are completely true. One is that all of them are fake. And you've got guys like Netanyahu who are actually, Polish and Eastern European, whose roots do not go, they are not part of that trunk that would go back to the tribe of Judah. They have taken on that mantle, and it's useful to them, right? And many of them are not even practicing within the Talmudic Judaism, which I don't think Netanyahu really does. So that's one thing I'll hear all the time. On the other hand, I'll hear kind of more what you were describing of there's a trunk of these people that have been around for going back to the, origins of man almost. And they are retaining their genetic heritage, and they believe they're special, and they believe they're chosen. So there's two things here. How do you reconcile that?
Well, think of a boat. Think of an old wooden sailing ship, like the USS Constitution, which is still floating in Boston Harbor, right? Old Ironsides. Over the centuries, they've replaced this plank, this mast, that mast. And like eventually every piece of wood on that boat has been replaced. None of it's the original piece of wood, from like when the boat was originally built. So is it the same boat, or is it not the same boat?
Right.
You see?
And you're not just talking about genetic going through the generations. You're talking about grafting in of other people's, mixed marriages.
Yeah, so I do believe that the original Jewish blood is in there, and I think it's mixed and proliferated throughout the entire population. As they've grafted these different peoples in, then it's it mixes around, gets assimilated. I mean, if the Khazarian conversion happened, it's still controversial. That was over 1,300 years ago, and they've been intermarrying, and they've had over a millennia to fully assimilate these beliefs. And the people who didn't find compatibility with these beliefs left. They left. They're gone, right? The ones that did find identity with it, did find compatibility, are intermarried now. They're subsumed into it, and now it's one big worldwide tribe. Now, see, the Jews don't differentiate between the different racial or ethnic types of Jews, but I do believe that they use that to confuse the Goyim, the Gentiles, to get us to take heat off of Jewish supremacy. They don't want us blaming. So I don't know if you want to bring up that graphic that we were talking about. This might be a good time to do that.
I definitely do, because I think a lot of people, and including myself, I lose the plot on this half the time because it's
So it gets very confusing because you see, well, there's some Zionist Jews, and then there seems to be anti-Zionist Jews which oppose what Israel's doing, right? And so people are like, well, it's not all Jews are like this, just some of them. But
before you go on, let me provide a perfect example. So on the left, you've got groups like the ADL and Hollywood and other, Jewish-owned groups, basically. But then on the right, you've got, all the groups that are supporting Trump. So it's very confusing because they seem opposed.
They do seem opposed. You have Jewish Voices for Peace and the Torah Jews and Naturai Karta and these different Jewish organizations that seem to be pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. But here's the thing. They don't blame what Israel's doing on Jews and Jewish supremacy. They blame it on whites. and Christian Zionists and European colonials, and they'll even call them Nazis. They'll call Netanyahu a Nazi. They'll call these Zionists, they'll call them Nazis. Of course, Nazis, 1930s Germans, their enemy, Jews in these 1930 Germans were enemies, right? They were, they were antagonistic. So these anti-Zionist Jews, these leftist Jews, if you will, they will blame Republicans, the Republican-controlled U.S. Congress. They'll blame conservatives. They'll blame white people. They'll call it white supremacy. They'll call it Christian Zionism, European colonialism, white privilege, white supremacy. This is the rhetoric they use.
Is this where a lot of the Ivy League colleges that have a Jewish president of the college, yet there's all the BDS stuff going on at the college too, which is highly confusing.
Yes, yeah. So these anti-Zionist Jews, they team up with Democrats, liberals, leftists, black people, brown people, Muslims, Islamic supremacists, leftist, anti-white people. That's who they align with, right? They align with that. Now, the Zionist Jews will align with the people that the anti-Zionist Jews blame. So the anti-Zionist Jews blame conservatives, white people, Europeans, Christians. So that's the Zionist Jews team up with those guys, right? So so Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager, these kinds of guys, they'll align with people like Glenn Beck or the Republican Party or your pastor, your Christian pastor, right? That's who they'll align with. While these anti-Zionist Jews will align with your college professors and anti-white, black people or these different Arab organizations, sure, or Muslim, all right. And so what happens is you have this two-sided dichotomy that gets formed, where one side blames one set of groups of people and the other side blames another set of groups of people. And then they each team up with the side that the other one's blaming. So it's like this mutually reinforcing sides. You see how that works?
Yeah.
But you'll notice that neither side blames Jewish supremacy. So the Zionist Jews, so Zionism says that, the problems in the world are brought on by leftists, they're brought on by Democrats, they're brought on by Islam and Muslims and, dirty black people and stuff. That's who's causing the problems in the world. The anti-Zionist Jews will say, no, it's white supremacy and capitalism and European colonialism, these and Christians, who conquered the world and genocided everybody. And that's what's oppressing everybody is white supremacy. Mm-hmm. All right. So you have two different sides. And so what they don't care which side you pick. They just want you to be on one of those two sides. Pick one of those two sides. Well, if you pick one of those two sides, neither of those sides is blaming Jewish supremacy for what Israel's doing. So it's Jews loading the bombs onto those planes, dropping the bombs, identifying the targets, shooting the artillery, killing the people, blowing everybody up. It's AIPAC, that's buying up all of our congressmen. It's the ADL that's censoring our speech online. These are all Jews. All of them are Jews doing it. But if you get on one of their two sides, you won't blame Jews for any of that. So you won't blame Jewish supremacy for anything because neither side blames Jewish supremacy. Each side blames a different group of people. But in neither of those groups is Jewish supremacy the culprit, right? So this is what they do. So it's very clever. If you choose one of their two sides, now nobody's blaming Jews. And now you're fighting amongst yourselves as you got white people fighting black people and Muslims fighting Christians and conservatives fighting liberals and Democrats fighting Republicans. There's all this chaos and fighting. Meanwhile, the Jews on both sides are just sitting back, fist bumping each other. Safely playing the victims again.
You think this is conscious that they understand? I'm not talking about high level people like Alejandro Mayorkas. I'm talking about people like down the chain. Do they get all this? Do they understand this plan, or is it like a kind of a black magic thing where it's just like it's?
I think yes. I think they do because Jewish supremacy, from what I can tell, seems to be endemic to the teachings of the Talmud, to the teachings of the synagogue. They have this attitude towards the goyim. They call us the goyim, which means cattle or the nations, but it also means cattle. And you can look up quotes by their rabbis that talk about how the goyim were born to be slaves and servants to the Jews. There is an antagonism that average people don't understand about Judaism and Jewish supremacy. They don't understand that this attitude exists, that this animosity that this enmity exists between them and us. It's a line that they've drawn. Like the rest of us, we grew up thinking they're just Jews. They're like us. We're there's normal people, just like there's a bunch of different religions in the world. They're just like us.
That's
Whatever.
how I always thought. Right.
Yeah, but this delineation, this separation's created by them, and they use it to wage war against us. So, you know, I do think a lot of them understand this. I think they're taught this in the synagogue. I think it's endemic to their culture. I think they're raised with it. And you know, and then of course Israel being a sovereign state now with billions of dollars and trillions of dollars at its disposal, then they're able to organize their people around the world more formally, you know.
Yeah.
But I do think that I do believe that a lot of just rank and file average Jews sort of know this or instinctually get it. Now, I do think but it can be sincere too. Here's the thing. The Jews have the highest degree of tribal identity or in-group preference amongst any culture in the world. Black people, Asians, white people, Christians, Muslims, whatever. Jews have the highest, they've done research on this, surveys. Jews have the highest degree of in-group preference, meaning they're the most tribal, the most hardcore tribal, you know, favor each other more than any other ethnicity or group of people. What that means is that they can also endure greater disagreements and greater intra-tribal fighting.
Ooh,
like,
good point.
See what I'm saying? Because they have a stronger in-group identity. The forces that draw them together are stronger than if for any other group, but that also means they can withstand greater disagreements. So they will have violent disagreements, you know, over politics, policy, positions, whatever, right? Amongst themselves. But for them, their politics does stop at their virtual water's edge, right? Like, you know, what's good for the Jews. Now, we'll fight about what's good for the Jews. It's like managers inside of a company. They might disagree on what's best for the bottom line for the company, like what's going to grow the company better, or what's going to make us more money. But they're all aligned that we want to grow the company and make the company more money. They just disagree on how to do that. And that's the same with Zionist Jews, anti-Zionist Jews, and different factions of Jews. They will have great disagreements at times, sometimes even violent, you know, but at the end of the day, they will hang together against the Goyim, against the Gentiles, right? Yeah. As to what's good for the Jews.
Let me ask a question that'll provide an escape valve for a minute here for somebody that's watching this and they're kind of tracking, but they're like, oh my God, like this is so racist or whatever. Like I have come across some Jewish academics, especially, that are aware of these issues and they're speaking truth, especially about maybe the war issue. Like Norman Finkelstein or Ilan Pape, or there's some others that I've really come to respect. Now they don't really get into the Jewish supremacy stuff as much because I think it's more of like an embarrassing.
Well, that's the thing. They don't talk about Jewish supremacy. They still claim like the shield of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. Like Norman Finkelstein won't debate anybody who doesn't accept the Holocaust at face value or who is anti-Semitic. You know, he will disengage from those people. But to my point, you know, he had a big fight with Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz famously, I think, basically nuked Norman's tenure at the university. And there was sort of a turf war between who's going to be the biggest Jew on campus, right? Type of thing. So there was an example of two powerful Jews duking it out, you know, on different sides of the fence. But at the end of the day, they're unified in pushing the Holocaust narrative and pushing Jewish victimology narratives and in you know, using the cudgel of anti-Semitism to reinforce Jewish supremacy, even Norman Finkelstein.
Well, let me provide an example close to home. There's a Jewish guy that Jewish in ethnicity, he would say, who I've become friends with. He goes to my church. He's a Christian. Like that supersedes his Jewishness. But he's got a Jewish name. He looks Jewish, the whole thing, right? We went out, had two or 3 hour meal the other day talking about all of this stuff. And aside from his affinity for Israel, he's very, you know, protective of that land because it's been baked into him about, you know, the danger. Outside of that, though, when I said, man, who are God's chosen people today? And he said, John the Baptist said, out of these stones, I can raise up children of Abraham. He's like, if you're a believer in Christ, you are God's chosen people. And he's a great guy. I like him a lot. I've been on his podcast and vice versa. So I'm trying to provide an outlet here. I mean, do you know of any big name Jewish people who could have this conversation that we're having and, you know, be frank about it?
No, I don't really know any. No, I'm
Come on.
serious. Like I've been in many Twitter spaces over the last year and a half, and
What about Elijah Schaffer? Isn't he Jewish?
he's not Jewish. He's not Jewish.
He's not.
No, oh, no. Nor is his wife. He jokes about that, but people don't. He's not Jewish.
Me.
And neither is
I
his
think
wife.
I heard him say he was once, and he must have been messing around.
Yeah, I mean, he just is like he's a shit poster. He's just pulling your leg. He's
kind of like Arthur Quan
Jewish.
Lee, except he's now he's saying he's Jewish.
I love Arthur. No, Arthur's my buddy. But no. So no, and even if there were, okay, so what? So there's 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, like big deal, because the vast majority of worldwide Jewry is aligned on this issue, on protecting Israel, protecting Zionism, protecting Jewish power, right?
The reason I bring it up is obvious. It's because it makes people uncomfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable, even though
we have to get comfortable talking about it. Now, nobody's uncomfortable talking about white supremacy or black power or Islamofascism. Like nobody cares. Or the CCP or the Chinese.
I was just thinking the other day, Sam, like when Coca-Cola came out and they during the whole BLM thing, and they put in their employee handbook, be less white. You know, that was like a thing. If it would have said be less Jewish, oh my God. Like it would, you know, it would have been would have shut down the company.
Yeah, so we need to normalize this conversation. We need to, why do they get special status over everybody else? That's Jewish supremacy. They shouldn't get any special status over anybody else. They're just another people, part of the worldwide marketplace of ideas and cultures. Okay, they don't deserve any special caveats. And I'm not saying that they should have any, we should target them in some way. Like I want to target Jewish supremacy because it is exercising authority over us. It's taking away our sovereignty, and we need to dismantle that so we can restore our sovereignty. Right?
Yes.
So that has to be. We have to do that. AIPAC is controlling our Congress. It's controlling our executive branch. Right? The ADL trains the FBI. The ADL controls online censorship. Like we have to do something about these things. We need to get our sovereignty back. We need to get our culture back. We need to get our country back. And unfortunately, the big thing that's one of the biggest thing standing in the way of that is Jewish supremacy. Worldwide organized Jewish supremacy is standing in the way of that. And I'm sorry, it's not hateful to say, it's just true.
Do you think Donald Trump understands it?
I'm not sure what he understands. His mentor was Roy Cohn. Jew, he's done business with a lot of Jews in the New York real estate market and with, the Russian Jewish mafia. I think
they got a lot more money than Donald Trump too, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to say he's a mobster, but he knows these people. He's down in Florida where the Mossad is known to have a large presence. He's surrounded by Jews. In his administration, he was surrounded by Jews. His daughter Ivanka is married to a Jew, a very powerful Jew on the inner circle, the Kushners.
And the Adelson connection as well. Didn't they fund
the Adelson connection? And he used to make fun of Marco Rubio for taking the Adelson money back in 2016. Now he's taking the Adelson money. So, to some degree, he's aware of this. To what degree is he aware? I don't know. There's a lot of boomers who aren't aware of this. They literally don't, because they just sit around watching Fox News, which is controlled by Rupert Murdoch, which is a close personal friend of Benjamin Netanyahu and other Zionists. So it's a Zionist run organization, basically. And so you're not going to get told these things. You're not going to learn this information on Fox News or from Breitbart or from Prager or from talk radio, Mark Levin. None of these guys are going to tell you this stuff.
Well, speaking of Breitbart, who's the head lead editor right now? Pollock with
Joel Pollock. Pollock.
Just a month ago, he posted a picture of his completion of the Talmud, and he had this big, huge, book at his chest, which the Talmud's like a library of books, but he said he completed it along with his rabbi or whatever. So for those people that are saying that, nobody knows the Talmud, nobody's paying attention. Well, there's the lead editor.
Well, it's crazy. No, it's a good point, because they'll say, because there's a lot of problematic stuff in the Talmud, like Jesus Christ is boiling in excrement and semen for eternity, and he's the child of Mary, who was a whore. There's a lot of terrifying, crazy stuff in the Talmud. And they'll say, it's so stuff like, kill the best of the Gentiles. It'll say, if you must kill a Gentile or hurt a Gentile, do it in disguise in another town or village.
Indirectly, right?
Indirect. Yeah. so many things. There's a lot of problematic things. Every Jew will have like 2,800 slaves when their Moshiach, when their Messiah comes. And they'll say, well, these are old beliefs, old cultural stuff. They don't matter anymore. It's just this banal book of legal debates. Nobody really pays attention to it. They'll say these types of things. Yeah. But yet their most powerful, the most powerful, influential people in their culture, in their race, the rabbis, devote their entire lives to studying it for something that isn't relevant anymore and doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I hear you.
More lies, right?
So would you say I was accurate in my, just brief guess really on it went from 2% of say right-wing conservatives getting this to some degree to maybe 10 to 15%, which seems like a huge amount, right? Would you say that those are fairly accurate figures?
I don't know. Maybe. I think they're directionally accurate. Like, I have a lot of friends who a year ago had no idea about this. And now a few of them are sort of like, they're kind of aware.
See it, right?
And there's people, I even get feedback on my Twitter timeline saying, I didn't know anything about this until, a year ago. And now, and so it's definitely growing. They just published some study saying that half the adults in the world are anti-Semitic or hold some anti-Semitic view. I don't know what they're counting in that, but they're always trumping that up because it's always used as a pretext to censor our speech because
that means nothing to me. They would love to say it was 80%.
Right. And by the way, I don't advocate violence. This is a battle for hearts and minds. If everybody, as my buddy Lucas Gage often says, if everybody knows and understands what I do, if I could just beam that into people's heads, then the problem would be solved overnight peacefully, But we're not there yet, so we have to wake people up.
Well, that's leading, and I know we don't have too much time left, but that gets to solutions. So let's say that it goes from, let's say I'm right, and it's about 15%, and there's some big names included in that, between the Candace Owens of the world and you and many others.
Kim.com came out late last year. Dan Bilzerian, Jake Shields. I mean, there's
the other thing I'm seeing too is it's not just that the voices are because 2 years ago, and I'm going to use Candace. I know she doesn't go as far as maybe you'd like, and I get that. But if she was saying the things that she was saying 2 years ago, Pierce Morgan would never have her on. She would be canceled from all. But now it's at least mainstream enough where pundits who will never go there, like they won't ever agree with her, they're still allowing her on. And again, now Stu Peters, he takes it to another level where he wouldn't be allowed anywhere.
Yeah, he's not allowed on. He's blackballed from a lot of places.
Right. Now. So my question is this. Let's say that I think there needs to be very wise Christian thinking men and women that understand this, that are leading the charge on this, because because you're saying you don't advocate for violence and all of it, and I agree with you. But as more and more people come to this knowledge, we got to be very careful on what we do. So what do we do, man? Like, because they're already entrenched.
We need to, it's two things. We need to keep educating people on the reality and the truth of Jewish supremacy and Jewish power. That's number one. But number two, we need to, here in America, I advocate for something called American nationalism. And we need to recapture our American identity, which is it's this melding, it's this inseparable connection of a European identity and a Christian identity. When America was founded, it was 98.3% Protestant, like 1.5% Catholic, and a couple thousand Jews and a smattering of other people in 1790. Okay, that's what America was. And to become a citizen of America, you had to be a free white person, meaning of European descent, who had lived here for 2 years. And back then, Europe was known as Christendom, and it had been Christian for centuries, over millennia in some cases. All of Europe converted to Christianity, and there were just dozens and dozens of generations of Christians. So what was America? America became this cauldron of free white Christians. That's what America was. And even until 1965, America was 93% Christian, 90% white European descent.
Till 65.
Till 65, when they passed the Immigration Naturalization Act and opened America to the world. All right, and we don't have time to get into that, but my point is for centuries, America was this mixing of European ethnicities and cultures to forge a unique American identity. And we were talking about that, before we kicked off the show. But what most people don't know is that even up until 1930, over 50% of the immigrants who came to America from Europe went back because they couldn't handle it here, or they didn't like the culture, or they couldn't take care of themselves, whatever it was. So for hundreds of years, you had people coming from Europe who were white Christians who had the ability to be individual sovereigns, to survive without handouts, to literally, in most cases, build a civilization, carve it out of the wilderness with their own bare hands, right? A frontier mentality, a pioneer spirit, a limited government, independent, entrepreneurial zeitgeist who could actually do it, right? So there was this massive filter. So not even every European Christian who came here could cut it. Half of them went back, right? So for hundreds of years, we had these filters operating, and that forged this unique identity of an American. Over on the European continent for centuries, they had wars and fights over who would rule. I call it the 3 R's, who would rule. What religion are we going to follow? And it was a battle for resources. America resolved all of these things. The resources here in America, we had an entire continent with everything you can possibly imagine, land for everybody, no resource constraints. We decided who would rule. The people would rule in a republic, right? With a constitutional framework. We figured that out too. And then in terms of religion, in 1776, when we declared independence, 10 of the 13 colonies had state-sanctioned religions that were subsidized by taxes. Okay? They were Christian states. So what to do about that? Well, we're going to have this First Amendment that says the federal government is not going to establish a religion. You guys, all of you different Christian denominations can have your own Christian denomination and worship your, and by the way, it was referring to Christian denominations. Okay.
Yeah. No, I get that.
In the first act of Congress, it said free white people of good character. And that clause of good character was specifically interpreted to exclude Mohammedans or Muslims up until the mid-20th century. So people say, well, this country wasn't founded to be Christian. Well, actually it was. And they actually interpreted that law to exclude non-Christians. So you had all these filters in operations such that, is it any wonder that in the mid-60s, we sort of reached the height of the space age, the golden era of the space age, at the same time that we're 93% Christian, 90% white, only a generation or two removed from the frontier. And boy, this country, the inter-ethnic squabbles have basically been melted away. It took a long time, but now the different white European ethnicities are not fighting amongst each other anymore. They're getting along, and they've all taken on this American identity, right? And America is just hitting on all cylinders. And then we get thrown this massive curveball in the 60s, and they take church out of the schools, prayer out of the schools, Bible out of the schools. They open up the gates to the non-European population of the world. And now we've gone from 93% Christian, 9% white to about 70% Christian, 58% white, and they're both falling fast. And we're losing the soul of America. We're losing the soul of America.
How do you think, if it was 90%, give or take, white, whatever, Christian, around 1965. Let's go back to the 50s and 40s. The black community, though, was actually doing pretty well. I'd say better then.
It was, and by the way, that percentage had been pretty stable since the Civil War. So for 100 years, that had been the demographic. Now, most black Americans were Christians. So there was this massive unifying force between blacks and whites through Christianity, because even most blacks were Christian. Okay, so they still had that cultural cohesion. And blacks, even though there was segregation, they still basically adhered to a basic white European culture, because that was the dominant culture. You look at old pictures, the black people are wearing suits and ties and hats and dressing like the white people, and they're going to work in businesses and driving cars, and they're basically living a European lifestyle as black people in America, right? And so there was, even though they were a different race, right? They've been here for a long time, and our demographics were very stable. It's about 90-10 for over 100 years.
Who do you think killed JFK? Because that happened around that time.
Yeah, so Israel killed JFK, and I'll have to end with this because I got to run. But
yep,
I'll give you what was going on. Israel wanted the nuclear bomb, and JFK was resisting letting them have the nuclear bomb. He was insisting on inspections of their Dimona nuclear facility. He was trying to register the AIPAC, or the American Zionist Council, the forerunner of AIPAC. He and his brother Bobby were trying to force them to register as foreign agents. He was also pushing and promoting the right of return for Palestinian refugees back to their homes and lands in Israel, where they'd been forcibly removed in the Nakba of 1948. So yeah, there's a UN resolution for the right of return of Palestinians that's just sitting out there unpassed. And in fact, the week that he was assassinated, he actually had diplomats at the UN that were promoting the right of return for Palestinians. So he was promoting that. He was trying to get that done. And then number 4, he was also, he wasn't letting Israel have any offensive weapons. He wasn't sending them any offensive weaponry, and he was limiting the defensive capabilities and defensive armaments that the U.S. was sending. And he was cultivating ties with Nasser and the Arab League and the Arab nations. He was trying to create a very good friendly bond between America and the Arabs. And so Israel saw this as an existential threat. He's cultivating good relations with the Arabs. He wants Palestinian right of return. He's trying to take away our AIPAC lobbying influence. He won't send us weapons, and he's trying to take away our nukes. And so they had to remove him. And by the way, LBJ gets sworn in, right? The very next day, he reversed literally all 5 of those policies. The very next day, he reversed them.
Yeah, and that's when all the country's demographics changed as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to park there for a minute. Thank you for spelling that out, because I do think that has a lot to do with the direction of our country from the 60s on.
Yeah, and we haven't been in charge of our country since then. They took control of our country then, and ever since then, our foreign policy and a lot of our domestic policy has been guided under their power and influence. What's good for Israel and what's good for Jews and worldwide organized Jewish supremacy. That's the direction our country has taken. We don't get to, like, why are we still fighting wars? You know, the war on terror cost us $21 trillion over the last 20 some odd years. And we're still, sending billions and billions of dollars over there. Why do we care? Why are we doing this? Because we're not in control of our country. They are.
Yeah. There's so many more questions I'd love to ask you, but I know you got to run, Sam. Really appreciate you coming on. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Jeremy.
All right. Thank you, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Let's talk a little bit about Israel.
We will always stand with Israel first and foremost, so everybody understands that very clearly.
For as long as I have the privilege of serving in the Senate from New York, I will unflinchingly, unstintingly, and with all of my strength, be Shomer Yisrael, a guardian of Israel.
Together, let's defend the shared values that already make America and Israel great.
Friends who share my strong commitment to make sure that the bond between the United States and Israel is unbreakable today, unbreakable tomorrow, unbreakable forever. Our alliance is based on shared interests and shared values. Those who threaten Israel threaten us. Israel has always faced these threats on the front lines, and I will bring to the White House an unshakable commitment to Israel's security.
There's nobody on this stage that's more pro-Israel than I am.
When I was a young senator, I say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
The people of Israel and the Jews around the world, we stand with you. We stand with Israel. Be strong and be brave.
I want to emphasize today the support of the American people for the people of Israel. I think you can see by the kind of delegation that came from the United States how strongly we feel about our support for Israel and how strongly we feel about our support for peace.
Israel has always been a strong ally of ours, and I appreciate that. I voted just this week to give more money to them through the Iron Dome.
Tennessee certainly supports and stands with Israel and will continue to do that in any way that we can.
And I made clear to him that his strongest ally in the globe is the state of Texas.
I will never yield in my support of Israel and that unshakable bond.
And this relationship, from Truman to Trump, is a tradition of supporting Israel deeply. And I think about that every day as I serve as America's Secretary of State.
We stand with the democratic state of Israel. And this is why today I come before you to support the $225 million in additional funding.
We are the most natural of allies. And like Israel itself, that alliance is forever.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was here, she has a very important position on appropriations, which is where this bill of funding for Israel takes place. And that's important in terms of anti-Semitism as well as pro-Israel initiatives. Adam Schiff is the chair of the Intelligence Committee. So we have people very well placed to share our values.
The two most important committees for Israel are Foreign Affairs and Appropriations. And you couldn't have two stronger supporters of Israel, both New Yorkers, than Nita Lowey and Elliot Engel.
And it is our honor to lead the committees that write nearly every piece of legislation that advances the strong U.S.-Israel relationship.
But if there's one thing that we concur on, whether we be Democrats or Republicans, and we are a bipartisan delegation, we come together in support with our friends, our only true friend in the Middle East, and that's Israel.
I believe Israel should never be a partisan issue. And as long as I'm a United States Senator, I will do everything in my power to ensure broad and bipartisan support.
I want to thank you, Democrats and Republicans, for your common support for Israel, year after year, decade after decade. No matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel.
Let us do the hard work necessary to keep building our friendship and reach out to the next generation of Americans and Israelis so the bonds between our nations grow even deeper and stronger.
If this Capitol crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment to Israel.
We are stronger together, and if we face the future side by side, I know for both Israel and America, our best days are still ahead. Thank you so much.